Welcome to this introductory video about jump. First thing I'm going to do is click on my Windows icon here. I'm going to find Jump Pro 14 in the list of my programs, and I'm going to click on it. And if you have a Mac, there might be a slightly different way to get Jump started. And notice two things. First of all, to make sure this fits on the screen, I'm going to move a few things around here. Okay, so there's the Jump Home window that opened. And here is the jump tip of the day. And chances are that this is not anything that's of interest to you, but notice that down here it says Enter Beginner's Tutorial. So right off the start here, you could do something a little different than what I have planned, and you could take the tutorial that Jump has for you. But I'm going to close that out, and I'm going to go ahead and identify that this is the home window. Over here on the left we have recent files that we've opened. Over here on the right we have the windows that are open, and currently there are no windows open besides the home window. It's very convenient to be able to find the home window and come back here if you start to get lost, because Jump will open a huge number of windows. So I'm going to go to the help, and I'm going to say sample data library. And I'm going to open Big Class by double-clicking on it. So I now have three windows open. I have my directory window, I have my home window, and I have the Big Class data table. So note, this is called a data table. Over here, I'm going to click back on my directory, and I'm going to exit out of that directory. Let's note a few things about this data table. First of all, in the upper left-hand corner, I have a place where there are scripts, and these are prearranged analyses that someone has stored with this data table. Normally this would be empty. When you save the work that you're doing, you can save it in the form of a script, and a script will reproduce the work that you've done. So we'll ignore that for now. Here is the list of columns, also known as variables. So this big class, we have a name of the student, the age, the sex, the height, and the weight. These little icons over here are showing you what role this variable is playing currently. And the roles are three different types. One type is categorical, looks like a bunch of bars. The second one is ordinal, it looks like a bunch of ascending bars in green. And continuous data, which is numbers that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1.1, 1.2, etc., etc. Down here in the lower left corner, we have the number of rows, 40 in the data set, and we see that no rows are selected, excluded, hidden, or labeled in a particular fashion. Note what happens when I select one row. See that it's selected? It now says one row selected down here. If I double click on selected, it will unselect all the rows that have been selected. So that's a very important thing to know for later in Jump, because when you do an analysis and you drill down into certain parts of the analysis, some rows may be highlighted, and then you may want to get them unhighlighted. So now I'm going to start an analysis. So I can do that by going to Analyze, and I have all of these different platforms that are available. And a platform is a set of algorithms or a set of instructions that the program can use to perform some work. So in the chapter from the Jumpstart statistics, they have the illustration of starting with a distribution. So we'll click on Analyze Distribution. And now we can add whichever variables we want. Okay, I'm going to add age, and notice I've highlighted the variable, and then I've clicked on Y columns. And I'm going to add weight, and I can click on this, on the variable. I can also simply drag it over. So I'm going to be looking at two variables at the same time, and whenever you add variables to a dialog window such as this, you can also expand the window. Look at this, see what I'm doing with my cursor? You can move this up and down to expand a box. And in general, I will be telling you what all the rest of these mean if and only if we need to use them at some point in time. So I'm going to click on OK. And so this opens up what we call a report. As you can see here, age, because it is an ordinal variable, is showing the frequencies, that is to say the count for each of the levels of the variable, each of the values it can take from 12 to 17, but it does not show us something like the mean, because taking the mean of an ordinal variable is meaningless. Meaningless. Did you get that? It's a little joke. But over here we see some standard ways of looking at the data, including having a histogram, something called a box plot. Over here we see that the mean is at 105 for the weight, and we see that here in this box plot the mean is shown by this line here in the diamond. We'll be coming back to a lot of that later. So the point here is that age and weight are different variables that have different roles. Age is ordinal, weight has the role of continuous, and because JMP knows the type of analysis that you're doing, and it knows the roles of the variables, it also knows what output to show you. And that's what makes JMP such a powerful tool once you start looking at the world through its eyes. I'm going to move this big class over, and here's our original table. Now look what happens when I click on the bar for 12. It first of all highlights all the 12-year-olds, and notice that here it's showing us that 8 rows have been selected. It also highlights the 12 bar here. It also highlights the weights of all of the 12-year-olds. What happens if I now say, what are the weights of the 17-year-olds? I click on that, and it's changed. Now there are 3 17-year-olds in this data set, and you can see where their weights are. What about the weights of the 14-year-olds? Looks like those are grouped somewhat to the center here, with a few outliers up here. And again, we have 12 that have been selected. If I want to get rid of this selection, I can just double click right there, and then notice that the selection disappears here. So to a large extent, these windows are interactive with each other. The next thing to pay attention to is these little icons up here and these icons here. So these first, these gray ones, are called disclosure icons. And if I click on that, it's just going to close that part of the analysis out. So let's say JMP gives me something I really don't care about, and I want to not have my screen be so cluttered. I can close out everything I don't want to see. And sometimes it's very convenient to close out everything and then just look at things one at a time, rather than being overwhelmed by the amount of output. But don't forget that you've closed it. The next thing is these red triangles, and this is an extremely important thing that you'll be using a lot of. So notice first of all that the report is organized in a hierarchical fashion. So up here we have the highest level. All of the menu options that you can get from this level will apply to every single analysis that you have open. So right now we have an analysis for age and one for weight, and all of these will apply to all of them. So for example, if I say uniform scaling and I've got 2 continuous variables, and I want to make sure that the histograms use the same scale, then I would click on that. If I want to see things horizontally rather than vertically, I can click on stack. And now you might prefer to see things organized this way. Each of these icons, these contextual menus as they're called here, the red triangle, applies now at the lower level, so all of these options apply only for age. So for example, I can say for my histogram, I can say show the count. Histogram option, show count, and that will tell me what the counts are for each of these ages. I can do the same thing for this histogram of weight. Histogram, show counts, and now I see that. Now if I think that these graphs are too small for me to see, I can grab the corner and it will make them bigger. So that is a very convenient function. Finally, let's try clicking on what we call an outlier. This point here is way bigger than all the rest of the points that we have, and when I click on it, or hover over it, we'll see that this is Lawrence with a weight of 172. I can click on it here. I can go look at it at the data table, and you'll see if I scroll down here, I'll see that Lawrence is in fact highlighted. I see here that one record has been selected. Now what happens if I think that having Lawrence in my data set is going to dramatically bias the results? Lawrence is what we call an outlier, but I want my analysis to be applicable to students that are simply in the regular range, and so I don't want to get the wrong impression by including Lawrence. So I could at this point say row, and I could say hide and exclude. And over here on this menu, if I go back here and I say redo, and then I say automatic recalc, then guess what happens? When I clicked on Lawrence, Lawrence was gone. Lawrence is now gone. What happens if I unselect Lawrence? Or let's say go back to rows and say hide and exclude again, which actually puts Lawrence back in, so that just reverses what I just did. Notice over here Lawrence is gone, but if I go back here to rows and I say hide and exclude, Lawrence came back and now Lawrence is gone. So we have some very powerful tools for including or excluding data depending on whether or not it is justified from a statistical but also from a business point of view of what we're trying to do. And we'll certainly be talking about outliers a little bit later in the class. So before heading over to the quiz, click on 60 to 80 here on this particular bar, and then notice what happens up here. And there will be a question which asks you to talk about the ages of people who have this weight and how many there actually are of them. So see you on the other side.